We have been looking at the subject of liberalism and what it's done to the church, realizing the problems that we have with liberalism in the Lord's church today. Of course, we have it in our society today as well. Liberalism is a cancer that works in our society, but it's also one that works in the church as well. Because liberalism perverts God's Word, perverts the Word of God, causing a disrespect for the Bible. That was the basis of the new hermeneutic. They didn't like, as they called it, SENI. That stood for commands, necessary inference, and examples, or examples, necessary inference. In reality, it's direct statements, implications, and examples. But they had to do away with those things because they didn't want a pattern to follow, and so they rejected any pattern theology within God's Word. Liberalism also causes men not to preach God's Word, no longer boldly presenting the truth and that one truth, and the fact that the church is that one church and that one body that's going to be saved, and all of the denominational world's lost. And now then just nice short story moral platitudes that fill the pulpits in the church today. Liberalism perverts the church. It makes the church, as many of them have claimed, just a denomination among denominations. We are no different than them. We lose all distinctiveness. And as a result, it starts perverting the work of the church, and thus we've seen congregations starting to bring in the instrument of music into the worship. We see women taking leadership roles within the church. We see a perversion of the Lord's Supper. We see perversions in relationship to prayer. And, of course, the preaching that we'd already talked about perverts the work of the church. We see this a great deal in relationship to liberalism, to get away from that. The church's job is to save souls. That is the only work of the church, saving souls. And the three ways in which it is to be accomplished is a preaching the gospel to the lost, edifying those who are saved, so building them up so that they will not be lost. And then there is that area of benevolence. Liberalism changes that work to self-gratification, to social issues, dealing with man's problems here upon this earth instead of the spiritual problem and trying to attain heaven's home. It also perverts the plan of salvation. We've gone into the denominational doctrines of salvation by grace only, salvation by faith only. As one said, we don't contribute one whit to our salvation, and that we are saved 100% by grace. Then even in regards to baptism, teaching that, well, you don't have to understand why you're being baptized as long as you're doing it to obey God. Whatever concept of obedience to God they view, as long as you're doing it for that reason, then it's acceptable to God. And so liberalism has invaded the Lord's church in all of these areas. But this afternoon I wanted to notice that the liberalism also promotes worldliness in the church. And when you look at this, worldliness and liberalism, it's a two-pronged sword in reality. Worldliness brings liberalism in order to justify their worldliness. Liberalism, on the other hand, justifies their worldliness, which then promotes more liberalism. They feed off of each other. They go hand in hand together. If you start seeing a liberal congregation, you're also going to see more and more worldliness within that congregation. When you see more worldliness making its way into the church, you're going to see more liberalism within the church, because they go hand in hand. They are together. You cannot separate them. They feed off of each other. And that's the way in which things work. Liberalism, worldliness going together. And so within the church today, you see a great deal of worldliness filling the churches within the Lord's church even. Immodesty certainly is a problem. Could tell many stories. Individuals who are trying to teach a Bible class, and they can't even look a direction because they can see all the way up to a woman's panties. So what do? They kind of keep their eyes away from that way. There's been men who have had to go to the elders and say, I can't pass the Lord's Supper. Why? What's wrong? Well, these women are dressed in such a way that I can't acceptably worship God myself because of the way in which they're dressed. Worldliness incorporating immodesty. We have been infiltrated by the thinking of the world and the styles of the world. That's worldliness. When we allow the world to set the dress code for the church, then we're worldly. Even if the style of that day happens to be acceptable to God, if we are allowing them to set the standard, it's still worldliness. Now, that may seem strange, but that's the case because we're allowing them to set the standard instead of God setting the standard. Only when you allow God to set the standard of our clothing will we be godly. When we allow the world, whether it's right or wrong, to set the standard, then we're worldly in our thinking. And just simply because the world might at that time and in that particular style be modest, if we're allowing them to set the standard when they become immodest, then we're going to become immodest because we're allowing them to set the standard instead of God. When God created man, Adam and Eve, placed them in the garden, they did not have clothing at that time. When they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, their eyes were open, they recognized their nakedness, and so they tried to cover their nakedness. And so they sewed fig leaves together to cover their bodies. The fig leaves that they covered their bodies with probably covered more than what a lot of the modern day swimsuits cover. Maybe some of them need to eat that tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But in all probability, it wouldn't help them because they don't care. When God comes and they hide themselves from God, God making them think, where are you? Well, we've hid ourselves. Why? Because we're naked. You see, even though they had clothed themselves by sewing fig leaves together to clothe their nakedness, they still recognized they were naked. God also accepted that they were naked as far as He was concerned. And so what did He do? He killed an animal and took the coat of that animal and used it to clothe them. The only thing is that the word that is used in relationship to the clothing that God provided indicates that He covered from the shoulders to the knees. To do what? To cover their nakedness. When we start uncovering, and this deals with men and women, either one. This isn't just a woman problem, it's a man and a woman problem. And we have men that are just as immodest and ungodly as we do women. So it's both. But when you start uncovering that area between the shoulders and the knees, then God's classification is, from the very beginning of time, that's when nakedness occurs. When God was telling Moses and instructing him in relationship to the tabernacle and later the temple, and specifically the clothing of the priest, as the priest would wear clothing, and they would have to, especially during the time of the temple, walk up the steps of the temple into the holy place, and then later on for the high priest, that on the Day of Atonement, the most holy place, they had long flowing robes. But as they would walk up the steps, in order to prevent someone from saying underneath those clothes, they were instructed to make undergarments that covered down to the knees. Why? Because God did not want to uncover the nakedness of those priests. And thus he was teaching a lesson that when you start uncovering that area above the knee, then God is saying, you do that, you're naked. And why is it that it's so difficult for us to understand when we're talking about modesty? We're talking about covering that area that God requires cover in order to cover the nakedness. When Israel was being taken away into captivity, it talks about that they were going to uncover the thigh of Israel, those who were being carried into captivity, and God says he's going to uncover their nakedness. Why? Because he's uncovering the thigh. Or those carrying them into captivity, the Babylonians, would be uncovering the thigh of those Israelites, and thus uncovering their nakedness. What is it? When you start uncovering that area, God says, that's showing your nakedness. Thus, why is it that we have that type of difficulty in the church? I literally, talking to a preacher several years ago, he made the argument that whatever was the customary dress of the people at that place in which you are, then that's what modesty is. If you go out on the beach, and let's just say, let me just use me as an illustration, all of the men there are without a shirt, have on real tight swimsuit, and I go out there wearing a coat and a suit. He would say that I'm immodest in that situation because I'm not clothed like they are. Now that's the argument that has been set forth, and that was a preacher in the Lord's church. With that type of thinking, why are we surprised when we start seeing liberalism coming into the Lord's church? And then what we have in connection with that so many times is the idea, well, you can't tell me how to dress. The elders can't tell me how to dress. Well, they can certainly tell you when you're in sin and withdraw fellowship from you if you don't bring your life in connection with what God's Word says and teaches on the subject. And it's their obligation in order to do that in reality. But we've got a lot of elderships that don't do what they need to do as well. And a lot of elders have fallen into that idea, well, we can't tell people how to dress. We might run somebody off. Well, okay, you don't run them off and they go to hell because of their immodesty, or you run them off and they go to hell. Which one's better? Either way, the same result is going to be the case. Do what God's Word says. And have you noticed, I haven't even talked about and even mentioned 1 Timothy 2, that women are to adorn themselves in modest apparel. But you know what that was? And we use that in relationship, and rightly so, in relationship to underdress. That is, we don't have enough clothing on. But in reality, that passage deals with overdress. That is, they were dressing in order to be seen of people. And thus, they were not modest because they were dressing in a way to try to demonstrate themselves, to show themselves off so that it would draw attention to themselves. And Paul is saying that type of overdress is sinful. But the principle is the same in regards to either one. We need to be dressing in such a way that we glorify God. And when we try to draw attention to ourselves, either by overdress or underdress, then that's worldliness. Now then, I can guarantee you, in most congregations of the Lord's church, what I've just presented would get me kicked out of most congregations. Because brethren will not hear it today. Now, why is that? Liberalism that has crept into the Lord's church. Several years ago, and probably many more since then, but congregation advertised they were going to have a swimming party. Make sure you bring your swimming suits. That was the Lord's church advertising that. You see, worldliness making its way into the church. Did they ever think about modesty and God's standard of modesty? No, that's something that cannot be considered. We have to appeal to the world and make our lives and dress like people in the world. Our dress, our clothing should be different than those in the world, so that people can recognize there's a difference between the clothing that we wear to cover our nakedness and the clothing that the person in the world wears that is so many times uncovering their nakedness. That's the idea of modesty, in a modest way. And yes, while 1 Timothy 2 deals with overdress, it applies equally to underdress, either one. Either way, and here's the problem, one of the problems with the way in which dress is presented so many times is that it is to draw attention to self. It objectifies the individual, makes them nothing but an object. And thus, men with women glare and make crude comments, and then women are offended because they make the crude comments, but they've dressed in such a way that caused it. And then you always have those who, well, I don't care how I dress, men should have the pure thoughts. Well, that's true. They should. But that does not excuse underdressing in any way, shape, or form. You should not dress in such a way as to cause others to sin. Now, there's going to be some individuals that are just so perverted, some men that are so perverted, that it doesn't matter what you wear, they're still going to think evil thoughts. That's not your fault if you're dressed properly. But if you're dressed improperly, then it is as much your fault as it is the man's fault. Either way. But we have seen this degradation of morality and our modesty through the years, starting back in probably the 1960s, in which was the introduction of the mini dress, and hot pants and all of these other immodest apparel, and it became the rage in society, and it made its way into the church, and the liberalism that was in the church fed off of that as well, and refused to condemn it and show what God's expectation is in regards to dress and the clothing of the body. Now, again, these things apply equally to men and to women. And yes, I know of a preacher who argued that it only applied to women. Well, he was foolish. He hadn't studied the Bible. God didn't just clothe Eve, He clothed both Adam and Eve. Now, why did He clothe Adam if it didn't apply to both? God clothed both of them. But we need to go back to that principle, dress, in order to show that you're a Christian. Dress in such a way that people recognize there's a difference between you and the person in the world. Then there's the aspect of gambling, and we've seen that, and more a proliferation of that in relationship to the start of these lotteries in our states. A state lottery. And so what do? Well, we go buy a lottery ticket. But how many of us think of what took place preceding that, even in the Lord's church many times, in which people would have a cakewalk or do something for school related that was nothing more than, well, buy a chance for this or a chance for that. And so you're buying a chance. What is? You're gambling. That you'll be able to win that by buying that ticket. That's gambling. Now, it wasn't called that. And so a lot of times we tried to sneak it by, but now then when the lottery comes up, well, nothing's wrong with it in so many cases. We've got brethren all over the place that you'll find buying a lottery ticket. Why? Because they see nothing wrong with gambling. Or if you're on the street, pitching pennies. Now, if you don't know what pitching pennies is, it's taking some coin and throwing it against the wall and seeing who's is closest. And whoever is closest to the wall gets both or all of the money. It's a form of gambling. And there's many forms of gambling that we overlook it. Gambling is never authorized within the Scriptures. It's not authorized as a God-approved way of obtaining money. Now, God does set forth ways in which we can obtain money, but that's not one of them. The very object, and here's so many times if you get into a discussion of gambling, the one thing that's always brought up, well, the stock market is nothing but gambling. Well, no, it's not. They don't know what they're talking about. The stock market is buying a stock. It is buying that amount of that company. If there's a company out here that's going public and they are going to have, just to keep it low numbers, 100 shares that they're going to make available. If you buy one share, you own 1/100th of that company. And you have the right then to go to that meeting and vote your one share in order to determine what that company is going to do and how it's going to act and who's going to oversee it, who's going to be the CEO and the president. You have the right to vote on those things. Why? Because you own a part of that company. That's business. It's not gambling. With gambling, what you're doing is, Paul and I are gambling, I'm trying to take his money. What's he going to get out of it? Nothing. or I'm going to get nothing and he's going to get it. But I'm sure I'd be a better gambler than he. No, the object is to take the other person's money. What do they get? Nothing. Difference in the stock market. With the stock market, everyone wants to win, yes. That is, everyone wants to make money. And if I make money, so do the other people. We all make money in that case. If I, with my one share of that company, of 1/100th of the share, if it makes money, those other 99 shares make money also. When I'm gambling with somebody, I'm trying to take their money and I'm going to get the money and they're not. You have two totally different situations. But yet, brethren have tried to justify gambling under those circumstances. That's going to make it all right. No, it's not. It's trying to take something that they do not have a right to in a way in which they do not have the right. Now then, we are to earn our living, work for it. We can, based upon charity and love, we can receive money from others. An inheritance, for example. We can receive an inheritance. We can barter with someone. I'll do this and you do that. There's different ways in which we can make money, yes, that God has authorized for us to do. But gambling is not that way. Gambling brings about selfishness. It brings about my own desires and not what God wants. It is a rejection of so many of the principles that God has set forth for us. Let me mention lying. In the church, we have the same problem today as the world. And that is, people don't tell the truth. In fact, if you tell the truth, you will be the exception to the rule today. Because by far, the majority of people lie. God is, in His very basic nature, a God of truth. Lies, Jesus said, are of the devil. He's a liar and the father of it. So all lies originate with Satan. Whether it's as we call it, a little white lie, or one of these big whoppers. Doesn't make any difference. Lying is still lying. And John, in his revelation, stated 2 different times that all liars shall have their part in the lake of fire. All liars. Now, what we see in our society is, well, some of it's all right. Some of it's expected. Well, no, that's not the case as far as spirituality and as far as Christians are concerned. We are to speak the truth. Now, I know that when it says to speak the truth in Ephesians 4th chapter, he's primarily dealing with the aspect of preaching and teaching God's Word. Because God's Word is truth, John 17:17. But there's also that very basic principle, speaking the truth in relationship to all things. If we're going to speak the truth, yes, we're going to be speaking God's Word, but we're also always going to be telling the truth in what we say. But that so many times today is not expected, and it's oftentimes ridiculed. I don't know if you've seen the kind of cartoon about Abraham Lincoln, I think is who it was, and his wife saying, or maybe it was George Washington, and Martha saying, "Does this dress make me look fat?" He says, "Well, yes, it does," and she whallops him. She's mad because he told her the truth. So what should he have done? Well, he shouldn't have told the truth. That's the thing. That's the idea behind the joke, the cartoon. Don't tell the truth because the truth might offend somebody. And you don't want to offend them, so you tell them a lie. And yes, how many times have we faced the same type of a situation where we don't really like what they have on, but are we going to tell them the truth or are we going to lie to them? Or is there another way in which to avoid it, and that's say something along the lines, well, I'm glad you like it. Or I'm sure other people will like it. Or other types of things in which we try and avoid telling the truth, really, but we don't tell a lie either. And that's all right to do that, to spare someone's feelings, but we cannot lie and say, oh, well, I think it looks great, when you think it looks horrible. And in reality, wouldn't the truth be better in that situation? That does not make you look good. You look bad in that. Well, maybe I need to go change then. Maybe other people will think the same thing. Maybe they won't. Maybe he's just dumb. Doesn't know why he's talking. But sometimes there's ways to say things without lying. Yes, and that's acceptable. But we cannot lie. We do not have the authority to lie. Ever. All liars will have their part in the lake of fire. If we want to go to hell, then simply lie. But we started, I think telephone helped this a lot. Somebody called, and one of the kids answer, and it's for mom or dad, and they say, tell them I'm not here. What have we done? We told them lying is all right. It's acceptable to God, acceptable to others. Or let me step outside real quick and then you tell them I'm not here. Well, same effect, same thing. You see, we've started teaching even young people that it's acceptable to tell a lie on occasion. In business world, how many times do we lie? Paul, can I use your lawnmower as an illustration? Oh, it's a great lawnmower. It works great. Buy it. And he said, it's a piece of junk. But to listen to it, it was great. It worked fine. Yes, right. He lied. How many times do we do that, though? Well, we make it sound good as long as it belongs to us, and we overlook those things that are wrong so that we can sell it and make a profit, and then the problem's theirs. Instead of telling the truth about it. That's just good business, though. That's the way in which we excuse our lying. And we need to remember all liars shall have their part in the lake of fire. But these things, along with many others, have made their way into the Lord's church, and the Lord's church ignores it. It's all right. Why? Because liberalism has come into the Lord's church, and liberalism has taken away our respect for God's Word. And it's made the church a denomination. And it's made the church where there is no pattern to follow. There's no code that God sets forth in regards to anything. And so liberalism has caused these things, and these things have caused liberalism to go farther, and both of them continue to compound one another because they're feeding off of each other. We'll look at some other things, Lord willing, next week. But these things have become problems within the Lord's church. Worldliness is a problem in the church because liberalism is a problem in the church. And we need to get back to a respect for God's Word because we want to go to heaven, because we love God. And remember, this is the love of God, that He keep His commandments, and His commandments are not grievous. We can obey those commands. We can live the way that God wants us to live. And yes, have the respect of the world. Even though they might ridicule, they still respect those individuals who have a high standard of living. Even if they don't. And especially if they don't. To be a member of the Lord's church, we must obey the gospel, though. And if you haven't obeyed that gospel, we would encourage you to do that this afternoon. If maybe you've allowed worldliness to creep into your life, instead of living that godly type of living that God expects, and you want to come back and make things right with Him this afternoon, and let us pray with you for the forgiveness of your sins, then why not come as we stand and sing the invitation song?